People no longer bound by their NDA. What can you now disclose? Not my own but from a family friend. Coca-Cola and Pepsi regularly settle disputes behind closed doors on things like employees trying to quit and join the competitor. Their employment contracts have entire clauses stating you cannot be employed by the competing companies even after you quit, so to protect company intel and confidentiality. For example, a Coca-Cola employee feels like he is being mistreated by the company, so he quits and tries to work for Pepsi. So Pepsi's legal team will inform Coca-Cola as soon as they find out, and Coca-Cola will sue the guy for breach of contract, and in return Pepsi will pay them. This is done so Pepsi and Coca-Cola don't sue each others into bankruptcy for breach of laws regarding industrial competition and market regulations. Basically a peace treaty of sorts. I signed an NDA for a predominant American show where they take a certain type of business on the brink of failure and transform it to save the business. When the producers of the show found out my wife and I both worked there, they tried to fish through our relationship for TV drama. When they found out we have a solid relationship, they tried to convince us to fake our drama with scripted conflict. Long story short, we got fed up and quit during shooting. We were cut from the show. Oh well. I used to work for a company that tracked ticket sales for theaters across the U.S. By contractual agreement with Hollywood studios, we collected information for approximately 80% of theaters, but we were not allowed to collect that last 20%. Why? You may have heard of Hollywood accounting. Hollywood studios work very hard to ensure their accounting is as beneficial to the studios as possible. No surprise. All businesses do this, but Hollywood has unusually high amounts of money and very narrow products, creating a distorted market, and the industry is rife with films grossing obscene amounts of money but not reporting a profit. Because our company couldn't collect that last 20% of theater data, it was impossible to absolutely say that a movie made X number of dollars. So, I can't prove it, but, on Friday, June 21st, 2002, the movies Minority Report and Lilo and Stitch were both released to great fanfare. Minority Report's opening week was reported at $35,677,125, 27.0% of total gross. Lilo and Stitch's opening weekend was reported as $35,260,212, 24.2% of total gross. This is a lie. Lilo and Stitch earned more money than Minority Report its opening weekend. 20th Century Fox couldn't have a Tom Cruise feature film being beaten by a fucking cartoon, so someone at 20th Century Fox called Disney and offered a deal. Since the full amount of money earned couldn't be proven, Fox would announce that Minority Report was the top earner for the weekend. In exchange, we never knew what the exchange was. We simply knew that Minority Report was reported as the top earner and Disney received some benefit for not saying anything. And then there was the shitstorm of Giggly later, but that's another story. Update: technically, I could have said this much earlier because when the studios found out our company wasn't handing out NDAs to employees, the studios were not happy. You do not make Hollywood studios unhappy. So the company quickly rushed to get NDAs out to everyone. They were distributed per team. They were distributed the week that I was switching teams. So both my old and my new team assumed I had an NDA when I didn't. I never bothered to correct their error. Update 2, by request. Here's the Giggly story. Used to work in a warehouse where we made feminine hygiene products. The pads came out of one machine into several different branded boxes, both the nickel gas station pads and the $10 a box pads. Also, we had one product of pads where we imported them from China, then repackaged them into our own boxes. I didn't have a problem with that. The problem I had was the box had an emblem saying Made in America. Would have been okay if it said Assembled in America, but number. I worked for a cosmetic company that did exactly this. We would have an order for say 10,000 units of the top-of-the-range $150 mascara. Once we had filled the tubes, we would swap out the packaging for the company's own generic brand $1 tubes and fill with the remaining product in the tank. So the tip for the mascara fans out there: If you find a mascara you love, keep the brush and just use that in a budget brand. It's most likely the same product and it's the brush that works well, not the magic formula inside. Used to work for Disney. They only use Disney employees for the test screenings of Marvel movies, so I got to see Guardians of the Galaxy 2, already great, and an early version of Doctor Strange that needed a lot of work. When we were giving feedback to the moderator, the writers were sitting in the back with their heads in their hands looking very defeated. It was a confusing mess, but they fleshed out the characters more, so it was better by the time it was released. Oh, also they used to kill a lot of ducks with pyro at Disney World when they did the Illuminations show at Epcot. SHHHHH. Adigo is a doggy daycare in Minnesota that made me sign an NDA for 2 years saying I was not allowed to talk about the company mainly, sadly, because they treat the workers and dogs like shit. No care for how many dogs were packed into a room, which is both unsafe for the dogs and the dog attendant. Often I'd be alone in a small room with up to 25 plus dogs, most who only had the most minor of behavioral tests done to see if they would play well in daycare. Owner also tried to get around not paying my workers' comp when I did get injured on the job, and whenever anybody put in their 2 weeks after realizing what a toxic work environment it was, which was often, he would punish them with scheduling them all week or make them open to close 12 hours for all their shifts. If you're in Minnesota and looking for a reputable dog daycare, stay away from Indigo. If in the Twin Cities, I would recommend Dog Days. Not perfect, but they actually seem to care. There are power line transformers that predate WW1 still up and running in the US, and the utility companies aren't 100% sure where most of them are. They only find out when one finally dies. Someone over 100 years ago put up a transform that powered telegrams all the way to Twitter. Edit. Okay, so people are asking. We'll try to address everything. I worked in the telecom sector. That means I needed to know something about how utility poles operated. On my first day they handed me a binder that was an idiot's guide to utility poles and made me sign an NDA on it. It was dumb because I'm sure even back then it was public information. I really do not know more than I stated. I use low V8 transformers at work and they are a black box of magic to me. Some people are mentioning PCBs and sure that makes sense. I don't know what they used to cool them 100 years ago. Transformers can last a long time. I have pulled multi-decade ones out of machines, so the idea that one hit the century mark seems reasonable to me and I haven't questioned it. When my internship was over I talked to a professor I knew about this and she mentioned the bird poop thing. I am not sure if this related to the multiple fires in California. My internship was in the Bay Area, and I sort of remember the binder being general, not that one particular area. Forgive me, but this was about 2007, so I can't remember this perfectly. I used to work in a call center that had Bayer Advanced. Yes, that Bayer. As a client, Bayer knows full well that their neonicotinoid-based pesticide, gardening products killed bees and were responsible for colony collapse. We were instructed to bold-face deny and or lie to the customer or caller if we were ever asked about it. We were also instructed to lie about the spray nozzles on the bottles. Bayer knew they sucked ass and were almost always completely DOA defective, but they refused to admit it and decided it was cheaper to just keep mailing replacement nozzles. A recently hired employee trapped the secretary in a bathroom at the company Christmas party and raped her. He was caught in the act, sentenced, and will serve a long jail term. All the employees who knew about the details were forced to sign strong NDA and ordered not to talk to any other employees. No one was told why the guy didn't show up for work ever again. The victim was offered a generous payout and never came back to work. HR put out a story that she was taking time off for personal reasons and her coworkers were never told why. Everything was hushed up as much as it could be. The company changed from open bar to drink tickets for all future company events. Google seems crazy this way. I've heard of cases where companies are pitching their offerings and Google comes in with a team that clear had no clue, makes a shambles of their presentation, and then doesn't understand why they don't make the cut because but we're Google. Add that they regularly murder products that people actually seem to like, and I wonder how they manage to sell anything but data mining and email. Okay, actually Docs is pretty cool too, but they really need to work on other sustainable offerings. Still bound, can't say where it was terminated 3 times by the same company for a disability. Ended up getting a rather large cash settlement from them to avoid taking them to court. They're bound not to say they terminated me. I gave them notice and the next day I got a letter saying I was fired. That's not how that works, and I'm bound not to report disability discrimination or elder abuse that I witnessed. Funny story. NDAs can't prevent you from making a report as a mandatory reporter to a governing body in my state. I reported them anyway. They tried to claim I violated the NDA, and the governing body in my state went ballistic and slammed them with a 7-figure fine. The CEO, CFO, and CNO were all forced to quit. The place is currently facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for multiple negligent wrongful deaths. I didn't violate the NDA and kept the settlement. Fuckers. Good on you. I have no pity for businesses that fire people over bullshit reasons. Even as a business owner myself, I was once fired for showing up late to work. The kicker is, I called the office to let them know I had a bad accident and my car was totaled, and I still showed up. I had to have a family member drive me there. This was before Uber, and my town doesn't really have a taxi service, so after they fired me, right after showing up, I had to call the same family member and ask them to come back to pick me up. I was more than happy to see their company folded and was bought out. Amazon is probably here, but I'm saying it anyway. The reason why people piss in bottles is that they are fighting against time off task. If in a week you accumulate a combined total of 15 minutes of non-working, not break away from your station, you are reprimanded or more likely fired. So walking away to pee, taught. Slightly late to station due to high foot traffic, taught. Stop at your station for a breather because it's hot. You're tired or sick, taught. The above plus the strict metrics and constant oversight of the lead staff makes working there feel like you're a machine. It reminds me of film representations from the 20s about the sadness of the future's poor. I worked as a freelance 3D animator and did a lot of Kickstarter projects. Everyone had their own $1 million idea, and loved to blast you with NDAs to keep you from stealing their idea. Anyways, one guy wanted to basically make a type of smart belt that just played videos, and was convinced he was going to sell it to Gucci. The guy was super nice, paid really well, and was a joy to work for, but he had no business sense. Well, the NDAs expired, and the Kickstarter page seems to be erased from the internet. So here's the trailer I ended up making. Edited out some bits to remove guy's personal info. https://www.youtube.com/watch v=hc7 and asks. Basically the belt was physically impossible to manufacture, but he wouldn't let me alter the design to fix it. Made for some cool shots for my demo reel though. That the ISP I worked for bought equipment in California specifically to do deep packet inspection, with the intention of slowing down or even stopping packets from competitive VoIP products because they were going to be deploying their own VoIP product in the next year or two. I used Vonage to talk to my son across the country, and within 2-3 hours of making the call, it got ridiculous. At our annual State of the Company meeting, where an executive came to each location in the country to speak, the CFO made a joke about how the rumors were circulating about this going on, but we don't do that, do we? Wink, wink. I was so angry that he was mocking it, while I'm struggling to keep a relationship going with my son during a custody fight, across country, using the cheapest possible option available, because I had no other options. I got up and told him that this policy was making it impossible to maintain a relationship with my son, and that their choices were having real-world repercussions for people who needed these services. Later that day, I took a tour of the head end, and one of the techs there pulled me aside from the line of people going through, and showed me the equipment. Thanks, Alan, you were one of the good ones. A day or so later, they came and took my PC off the floor to dredge through it for ammo against me. and started the paperwork to fire me. They made me sign an NDA that I wouldn't talk about what I'd seen in the head end. The regional manager who was firing me started lecturing me on loyalty until I reminded him that he cheated on his wife with one of the call center staff and got caught, so he was the last person to be lecturing me on loyalty. Oh boy, that was some kind of fury. I thought he was going to belt me. Honestly, best thing that could have happened to me. I went back to school, spent some time teaching, and then started my own little company. Reminds me of my first job. At night my managers and I would set up mouse traps in our grocery store. They were eating one cantaloupe every night. I came in the morning and we both looked at each other. The trap was sprung but no rat. We then saw a trail of blood that led into a freshly opened box of oranges. That fucker died 20 feet away and climbed 3 feet of boxes, next to the cantaloupe display. The box of oranges was covered with blood and his legs were all pointed up. Thankfully, manager told me to throw it out. I worked for Sears as a salesman for 2 years and it really felt like everyone there knew the company's days were numbered except for management and those who had already been there for 10+ years. The writing on the walls were there years before I started. It was hard for me not to laugh out loud when the store manager started pushing Sears' own internal social media Pebble onto all the employees. Don't ask that question here. Post it to Pebble. You can't use Pebble at home. But if we catch you using it on the floor we'll reprimand you foul. Uber was planning to make their own Google Street View for use in the app to better help drivers find riders and to map the world for driverless car technology. But they were going to use Uber drivers to capture the images for the Street View. The plan was to mail out inexpensive GoPro-like devices that magnetically attached to the roof of the drivers' cars. Each would have SD cards that could be mailed back to Uber. Routes would be generated and the drivers could accept them in the app and get paid. This plan fell through quickly and Uber eventually sources this data from third parties and ultimately abandoned their in-house driverless car ambitions. Also, Microsoft developed a really cool backpack-mounted camera that was going to be used for something like Google Street View. The plan was to take it into pedestrian-only areas so you could get imagery indoors like malls and in walking spots. The United States military snatched up the entire project for their own use and that product was never released or even announced to consumers. My NDA is still in effect, but I've covered my liability. A few years, with the previous insurance company I worked for, we fired an employee who had a nasty personality. Imagine a toxic gamer working in a call center and that would be this guy. He had been the son, or grandson, of one of the board members so he was untouchable. When his relative on the board got voted out, it was finally time for this little troll to be fired. His supervisor took him to a conference room to let him know he was fired and he was escorted from the building by security. As the HR manager, I was tasked with clearing his desk and separating his property from company property. That was when I found a heavily used 5 inches x 8 inches notepad on his desk that had a list of names. Next to each name was a mailing addresses and details about how this ex-employee planned to harm these people. I did some digging and found they were all current or former clients of the company and that they all had filed complaints against this monster. It was a hit list. I notified the board after I notified the police. The shit was arrested on unrelated drug and assault charges. The prosecutor now had to consider charging this guy for his hit list. Since she couldn't convince a judge there was a strong enough case, the prosecutor decided to impanel a grand jury. Since I was the individual who found the notepad, I was subpoenaed to confirm its provenance. Considering any other employee could have walked by and deposited this list on this asshole's desk, the grand jury decided to not move ahead to a trial. For the drug and assault charges, the former employee was sentenced to 16 years in prison. As a witness, I wasn't issued a gag order regarding the grand jury investigation. However, my work did order me to sign an NDA to protect the clients who were on that hit list. It was really just to cover up that they were in any danger. I signed and then quit as soon as I got a job offer with another company. Those bastards on the board cared more about their profit margin and public image than they did about people's lives. If they figure out I'm violating that NDA, There's not much they can do. They know antagonizing me with a lawsuit would only lead to me telling the media, naming the company and ruining their public image. Edit. For clarification, the reason I signed the NDA was because I needed access to my office computer so I could look up the most recent contact information the company had for the people targeted on the hit list. I then gave that contact information to the prosecutor and her investigators. They just tracked down the last person this year and everyone is safe and accounted for.